Hello, welcome back. If you've been here before, if this is your first time here, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I like to talk about. This is me ranking all the episodes in season 1 of the Magnus Protocol, all 30 episodes ranking the S to F. Obviously, Magnus Protocol is a horror podcast produced by Rusty Quill, written and directed by Alexander J. Newell and Jonathan Sims. I've already made a handful of videos about the Magnus Protocol, reviewing every episode, giving my thoughts, ideas, and theories for them. So go ahead and check those out if you want. Heavy spoiler alert for those. Heavy spoiler alert for this episode as well. I'm not going to be doing a season 1 retrospective, quote unquote, until after all 3 seasons are out, because some things in season 1, their perspective might change depending on what happens in the later seasons. So I'm just gonna wait until then. Same thing with the kill count. I'll do a kill count once all 3 seasons are out, because some people might die retrospectively. Is that the term? Later, we find out that they died here in a later time. We saw it a lot in Magnus Archives, so just want to be sure that we got all the information. But these are just my opinions. First, I wanted to really briefly mention the epilogue that was released last week, this week, something like that. It is canon, and Alexander J. Newell said that this episode is integral to understanding the entire series, etc. But it was a really short episode, and not much happened in it. Alice comes back to the OIR and sees that Gwen has finally taken over of the OIR in place of Lena. And Gwen's like, I'm trying to get to Lena. And, Alice is trying to get to Lena, and Gwen is like, she's gone. It's me. I'm the boss now. And Alice is like, stop joking around. Something happened to Sam. And she's like, and Gwen is like, what happened? And she's like, something happened. The archivist happened. Gwen is like, what about Colin or something like that? And then Alice remembers, oh God, Colin called me. So she tries calling Colin, and he doesn't answer. And we hear his phone ringing in the office. And then it cuts to a tape recorder recording of Sam falling through the rift and landing somewhere. And he's like, oh, what? And then he just passes out. And that's a really short moment. The transcripts I use don't have it, but the transcripts given by Rusty Quill itself, which have somewhat stage directions, say that he landed in the, quote, London exclusion zone. So, don't know what that means yet. That's the biggest, information thing for me here. And then the last scene, Gwen and Alice are trying to find Colin's phone. She keeps calling him, keeps it ringing, and they find it. It's on, a server rack. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a server rack is. And it's vibrating against metal, and I think it's implied that there's something alongside it. And yeah, at the end of it, Gwen is like, what is that? And then she screams because something happened, and that's the end of the episode, or the barely episode. But yeah, not much happened here. I'm not counting it within the 30 episodes because it is such a short episode and not big in terms of information beyond the location that's not even shown in the episode itself. So superfluous information that we'll get later. But anyways, just wanted to mention the epilogue there. I'm just not going to be in the ranking video here. The majority of the time when I'm ranking these, I am basing it honestly off of the cases themselves. The surrounding plot elements, I'll only really mention if they're extraordinarily important to me. But the cases themselves are really what I'm focusing my opinions on. And in all of my ranking videos, I never really have established a definite ranking criteria. But it tends to be quote unquote nostalgia, how it felt like in the moment. The technical aspect, the emotional aspect, there's a handful of different things revolving around it. What it means for the entire season as well is part of the ranking for me. So these are our rankings. In S tier, we have Ink 5 Muse, Ink Soul Muse. This is, so obviously we know that Ink 5 used Oscar Garrett's tattoo designs to inspire them to make tattoos, got them famous. And so I'm more or less correlating Oscar Garrett, S tier, Ink 5 Muse as these are the top, In tier A, we have something similar along those lines. We have a guest on Madam E's channel, Madam Electrum, who was a character in episode 16, Antisocial. She has a channel that's very famous. I think it was 173,000 followers. And being a guest there is really good, aka Ink5 being a guest on the channel. I like to see it as like, if you've seen my other ranking videos, I had like an S tier be like open for Grifter's Bone or a guest on What the Ghost, that sort of ideas. Like this episode, character, person, etc., ranked is really good enough to be a guest on this character. And I mean, Madame E looks like she has a really good following, so it must be that she does something good, before Ink5 broke her heart. In B tier, we have Still a Realtor, which is a reference to Helen Richardson, who we saw in episode 15, Catching Up, where we learned that she is still a realtor. I mean, before this, we've seen a handful of characters who are from Magnus archives coming back to Magnus Protocol, and they're slightly different. Say, for example, Gerard Key is alive, and so is Gertrude Robinson. She's going by Gigi now. And Basir Hussein, we saw, she is now a teacher at a school and no longer a cop, has never been a cop. And so, like, they've changed. But Helen Richardson, it's still a realtor. So, middle of the road, like, yeah, you're still a realtor, In C tier, we have Hunted by Lady Mowbray. This is, obviously, you all know Lady Mowbray is an avatar of the hunt. Perhaps, maybe. We don't know yet. This means, if you're in this tier, you're not the best. And so you're being hunted down by this woman because she wants to kill you. And it's not one of the best episodes if you're in this tier, C tier. In the lowest tier, we have Via Con Bonzos, which is in reference to this fandom event that happened. I'm not sure how famous it got, but it was definitely famous on my side of Twitter in terms of Magnus Protocol, where the Twitter, YouTube channel Sarcastic Scribbles, she joked about twinkifying Bonzo, and people were like, do it. And then she did, and that caused a whole storm of, like, it was all positive. It was just her notifications were flooded, and it was just this whole thing that happened that I only saw like the beginning and like tail end of it, because most of that happened when I fell asleep. But it was a big thing, and I'll link the video that Sarcastic Scribbles made that sort of chronicled everything that happened. There was like porn bots in the replies. There were people who were sharing it all over. It was a big thing. I'll link the video. Check her out. She does amazing artwork. And yeah, Viacom Bonzos is a reference to all of that, because if you're in this episode, this rank, if you're this episode, you may go to Bonzo, Viacom Bonzo, leave, etc. I cast thee away to Bonzo, basically, is what I'm trying to say here. But yes, these are the rankings. So let's get into it. Spoiler alert for all 30 episodes of the Magnus Protocol. And let's begin. Episode 1, First Shift, is going in a guest from Madame E's channel. That's a mouthful. There's a lot happening here. This is really good. I'll say it now. The first crop of episodes for this season are just amazing. And so there's going to be a lot of praise here. But yeah, this one's pretty good. We get the introduction of all our characters. Sam gets hired. Teddy quits and leaves. And we sort of establish the dynamics between all of the characters. We have 2 cases that that are read out loud, both of which showcase that Alice names them Norris is Alexander J. Newell, who voices Martin, obviously, and then Chester is voiced by Jonathan Sims, who voices John Sims. So there is definitely, like, this is the first time we're like, oh, okay, so they're doing something here. And the cases themselves are also pretty interesting. I mean, the first one about a woman who is sending a message to like a sister or a friend or something. She's like, yeah, I think it's a sister. Who's like, yeah, this charlatan says that I can speak to my husband who's died. Just come to this cemetery. And she goes to the cemetery and sees this figure, and the figure is just standing there. And she's like, are you Arthur? And it says, some of him. Ugh, love that. It's a very short email as well, which gives enough time for the next case, which is of a interesting format, obviously, of a forum post of, what's his name? Red Canary, who is wanting to explore the Magnus Institute ruins, obviously establishing a handful of differences between Magnus archives and Magnus protocol, and exploring there, and then finding an object, taking it out, and then going a little insane by a thing that is threatening them. And then they post a picture, and I really like this moment because I was listening to it the first time. This is the first episode of the Magnus Protocol. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what it's promising. And the very one of the last posts is, image removed by moderators. Canaries should stay above ground, which is ominous. And then the reactions of the people after the fact are stellar. I mean, they're like, gross. Can we get this out? Are those eyes? It makes you want to imagine what they're seeing, and that's so fun in like horror. So that's a really good moment here. The fact that they're not connected, the two cases are kind of disparate. That's it. And there's just a lot of things happening here. It is a really, really great episode. It's not like an amazing episode, but it's really great, establishing all the characters, like I said, and just beginning the story in and of itself does really well for this episode. And also, there's some replayability, re-listenability, I think. You can listen to it again and again, and you always get something interesting after the fact in terms of how the characters are interacting and what the things they say and stuff like that. So, yeah, this episode, really good. A tier, a guest in Madam E's channel. Episode 2, Making Adjustments, is also going to go in a guest for Madam E, because this is episode where we first get introduced to Ing 5 obviously. This is also the first episode we've seen that is written by Alexander J. Newell, because the entirety of Magnus Archives was credited as written by Jonathan Sims. I'm sure that Alexander J. Newell had some hand in writing some episodes, editing it, stuff like that. But here, this is when we start seeing different authors for all the episodes, or at least the cases. And that's really fun. And so this is the first time we see Alexander J. Newell actually writing stuff by himself, maybe edited obviously by Jonathan Sims, but whatever. And he does a really good job at it. It was seamless to me in terms of the voice of Magnus Protocol and Magnus Archives. I would not have known that Jonathan Sims did not write this. So that was also like a good thing. And also, it was a good story in of itself. The case of Daria and the therapist in like a recording was really fun. The voice actresses for Daria and therapist Kate Sketchley and Jenny Halfeck, respectively, are amazing in their delivery, especially Kate as Daria, who is talking about her tattoo that she gets from Ing 5. The moment where she's talking about the pain that she feels from Ing 5 giving her the tattoo is terrifying. And then at the end of it, Alexander J. Newell does this thing that I like, that I'm calling listing horror, which is just listing a bunch of different things, and each the fact that things are being listed and the things individually all together deliver some form of horror, and I do enjoy that a lot. I've seen him do this a handful of times in the Magnus Protocol. When she's listing out the different things that she's changed on her body, and it keeps going, and it just keeps going, and it just keeps going. That's so fun, and you just realize how far she's gone down in the hole of fixing her body. And so that is one of my favorite parts of this episode. We also get discussions of the DPHW. Moments surrounding the case itself are not really much to talk about. Things are happening, but the case itself is really interesting. So overall, it's going to be an A tier for me, a guest from Madam E's channel. Episode 3, Putting Down Roots, is also going to go in a guest from Madam E's channel. I think so. This is the first episode where someone who is not Alexander J. Sims or Johnny Sims, Alexander J. Newell and Johnny Sims, sorry about that, wrote this episode. It was written by Graham Patrick, and it's about a doctor what's his name? Samuel Weber. The case here is given to us in a form of like a report and and the detailing of a journal that is found of Dr. Samuel Weber, who escaped from prison and ran away and found like this garden tree place and stayed there and then became part of the tree and died. Overall, it's a very simple story. It details a lot of the things that are happening to him in a very gruesome detail. There's a line that I remember listening to and viscerally reacting to it because beforehand, all the things that were happening to his body were disgusting and terrifying. And then it says, "My left arm is now completely numb, and my skin is splitting down the bone. I removed the phalanges, tugging them out like stones from a peach." Ugh! You know, phalanges, your fingers, your finger bones, tugging them out like, oh god, that, ugh. And then later, or earlier later, I forget, he describes his skin like blanched tomato. That also made me have a reaction, not as strong as the phalanges one, but like the descriptions here are so visceral, and also the writing is so smooth as well. So I really enjoyed it for that aspect, and especially because someone else wrote this story and they're bringing in new authors so that their work can be exposed, so that their name can be exposed, so that people can like, hey, I really like this one episode written by this other person, let me check out their stuff as well. Is just an amazing opportunity for those writers, and hey, give me that opportunity. So yes, this episode's going in an A tier, a guest for Madam E. Episode 4, Taking Notes, is also going in a guest for Madam E. Like I said, the first 4 episodes of this season are just immaculate. This episode, this case is of a old man sending a letter to his nephew, giving him a violin and detailing how he got the violin and how to make sure that it works. And basically, it's a violin that he gets from this guy in the forest one night because he got lost. He was in the coach with his mentor, and his mentor just went insane and flew out the coach and bashed his head on a rock and died. And then he had to kill the driver himself. I think the implication's there. And then he's in the wood lost, and he finds this guy who gives him this violin. And he's like, I can't pay you for this. And it's like, just think of it as a gift. And the violin makes him play really well when he's going to his music school, but he has to hurt himself for it to play well. And he has to turn to killing other people who they won't be missed. And he's like racked by guilt, I guess, for that. And so he tells his nephew, don't ever play the violin without giving it blood, because the one and only time I ever did that, when I wore bandages on my fingers and played the violin, it still played beautifully, but then the people he was playing to started violently attacking and killing each other. So this is the slaughter. I always love slaughter episodes, and I wanted more of the slaughter moments, but the like dread and despair in him when he's talking about the violin of itself is enough for me for this episode. I wanted more violence, but that's not necessary. I should mention as well, if I ever mention anything about the Magnus archives, Smirks 14, it's because we don't have a definite answer as to whether they're here or not. In my opinion, they might be in a different form or in a different taxonomy, but the entities still feed on fear. So I'm still going to talk to them like they are Smirks 14, 15, because that's the framework that I like. Until I get any more information from the Magnus Protocol, that's what I'm going to be referencing. So the slaughter obviously is going to be here. The case was written by Cole Weavers. He does a really great job in delivering all of that. And also we get the first instruction of Augustus, who is the other voice to text speech in FR3D1, who is voiced by Tim Fearon, who is theorized by me and a lot of other people that this is Jonah Magnus. This is his voice. So that's not a definite answer, we don't know if it is or isn't, but it's a theory. But yeah, this is the first time we get an Augustus voice. I'll say this now. I've said before in my Magnus Archives videos that I'm not much of a fan of the quote unquote older cases where it's like a letter to Jonah Magnus. But in Magnus Protocol, I think the older episodes are the most interesting ones to me, which is an interesting comparison between Protocol and Archives. Episode 5, Personal Screening, unfortunately is going to go in Hunted by Lady Mabry. I think that the first 4 episodes being so amazing, and then the 5th one hitting, and it just doesn't hit for me. I don't think it's really bad. There are some good aspects to it, but the format in and of itself of a blog poster making posts makes sense. But then he's like, "Oh, I found a way to voice to text everything that I'm doing," and I'm like, this breaks a little bit of my immersion. There's some fun parts to this case, I will admit. For example, when he gets to the text-to-speech portion, there is a moment where Tom. It sounds like he's going to like curse, but the recording doesn't catch it. It just says unintelligible, which is really funny. And in the blog post, he talks about uh, wanting to find the scary movies and reviewing stuff. And the movies he does review are all deleted. Which after the first few, I didn't really like notice that until like the last few. I was like, oh wait, they're all being deleted. That's odd. And he talks about finding voyeur, and it's all circumstantial. Is that the term? It just kind of happens, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why why this thing happened to him. Voyeur needs to be seen. The scariest movie I have ever seen, being repeated a lot, is kind of fun. Uh, but then we get to like the last part where it's just him talking into his recorder, and he's like, "Wait, that looks like the hospital room where my dad was. What is that? I what is that? What?" And then it ends, and I just feel like there's not enough there to imply something. It's just too vague. Like I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it a little bit more with like a later episode. But sometimes the format just doesn't really fit for the presentation of it. So, for example, this is a blog post, and the way that I think if it was just a blog post itself, he's writing it itself, I think it would be slightly better. But when it says like, "Hey, I'm gonna do voice to text speak," then it feels like just trying to do something more with it. There's just a little too much confusion, a little too busy with how things are presented, and does get muddled, and which is why I just can't really enjoy this episode that much. There's not much horror for me to feel in this episode in of itself. I think the buildup was really good. I think just the how it ended was not my cup of tea. But I do think the buildup was really good, and the implications of the post being deleted is interesting enough for me to not to put it so low, but it's still C tier. Shout out to the author Jamie Petronas. I'm not judging the author for this. They're probably given a prompt or something along those lines and have to bend around it. And just unfortunately, I didn't much enjoy this case. But I'm not discounting Jamie Petronas and what they can do. So I'm just saying that how this case ended, I didn't much care for it. Episode 6, Introductions, going straight up back to a guest on Madame E's channel. This is, of course, where we get the introduction of Needles, voiced by Harry Roebuck, and the introduction of Celia Ripley, voiced by Lorianne Davis, who we all know about Celia. And so this is the first time where like we started with this, hey, what is she doing here? So it's a really great episode for all of that. Harry Roebuck does a really good job in delivering this crazy guy covered in needles introduction of needle into your finger, into your body. There's not many moments in this that I can remember that are like horrifying beyond like the sound of the man who's getting stuff in him.
Hang on, I'll ask him. What do we think? Police or ambulance?
Sir? Sir, are you in danger?
The operators are really good in their voice acting. Heidi Quinlan, Tom Park, and Joe Bence. Joe Bence, especially being the last police operator that Needles threatens, does a really good job as well. This case occurs pretty recently in the episode, in the story. The case was cataloged February 12th, and the case occurred February 9th. So it's pretty recent, which means that Needles is still around, and that's always really fun. And obviously, we have Celia being Celia, and I love her. And this was a great episode because it introduced her and Needles. We haven't seen Needles again. We will. I mean, come on. Harry Roebuck was amazing as Needles, and everyone loves Needles. Everyone's twinkified Needles, except for Sarcastic Scribbles, who's verified Needles. Take what you will from that. Episode 7, Give and Take, is going in Fievel Muse. I love this episode so much. This is written by Alexander J. Newell again, and this is another example of his listing horror. We have Diane Margolis, B.A. Hans, J.P., who is sending in her resignation letter from the Hilltop Center branch of Oxford People's Trust, which I believe is like a charity shop. I think it's implied that's a charity shop. I'm kind of confused on that aspect, but like I said, she starts listing different things, different objects that these random people that she can't remember their names of and can't find the paperwork that she signed to hire them. She can't remember any of that or find it. They bring stuff in to donate to the center, and she begins listing them out. And all of the items are just weird and could be lent to being kind of terrifying. And at the end of it, like, the place is burnt down, most likely by Starkwell. We don't have a definite answer on that. This episode inspires a lot of speculation about what these items are for, what this all happened for, and I enjoy that a lot. A lot of people are saying that this was some form of a ritual, akin to the rituals that we've seen in Magnus Archives. I like that idea, but I don't know what the purpose was for, because obviously we don't know. And so there's a lot of different implications here, and I do enjoy that there is space for these implications to grow and to change our perspectives. Episode 8, Running on Empty, is also going in Incredible Muse. I enjoy this episode a lot because I like liminal architecture and liminal stuff and stuff like that. It's really interesting that this is, I think, the only episode where we begin straight off from listening to the case, because all the other episodes start with like the characters and then it goes into the case. This is the only one where we just start with the case already, and that's interesting. And it's a Terrence Stevens sending in a report to Joseph Peterson about brutal liminality. And he's talking about how he works as a janitor in this service station, and he's working there one night and weird things happen. He almost gets taken over by sinister lights, and he goes up into the service station and finds that it's full of people, but they're all kind of odd, and they turn to him and they begin to try to eat him, and he jumps out and breaks his arm, and he's like, yeah, that was a weird hallucination I had. And that's really fun. I enjoy this one a lot. This was also written by Alexander J. Newell. He does a really good job writing these. I didn't take this into consideration when I ranked this because I was mostly focusing on the case, but I forgot that this is the episode where we also get Jerry and Gigi, John Gracie and Sue Sims, the love of my life, back here in the Magnus Protocol, which is really fun. I forgot about that in this episode. There's a lot to love from this episode. Anything about architecture within the Magnus realm is also really fun. Obviously, there's not much of a focus of Rubber Smirk in Protocol, but still, anything about architecture in horror is really fun for me. Episode 9, Rolling With It, is going to go in still a realtor, B tier, middle of the road. This one's a fine episode. Nothing really amazing, nothing really bad with it. It's a guy, he finds this pair of D6 that are kind of weird, and he makes people roll them, and if they roll bad, then bad stuff happens to them, and if they roll good, good things start happening, and so he makes people roll bad so that when he rolls, good stuff happens to him, and so he becomes, in a way, an avatar of the end, maybe, in terms of death and stuff. And there is a mention of like, if you roll really bad stuff happens. And I was like, you roll 2d6 and get just 2, then you get hit by a car or something. And then he's like, for the first time, my friend Gary rolled a 2d6, rolled the dice, and got snake eyes. And I was like, the first time? Really? Because I've played a lot of D&D, and rolling 2d6, granted, has a low chance of rolling snake eyes, but like, it's not uncommon. It's not. I don't know. Like, I just feel like saying that you've never rolled snake eyes with how many times you rolled the dice itself kinda feels weird. Not. I mean, it's definitely possible that he never rolled it, but the probability, if you do roll snake eyes, you die. His friend gets run over by a car. I talked about it in one of my videos that like this death scene reminded me of the death scene at the end of Final Destination 4, I think 3 or 4. So I talked about it there. So I'm not going to talk about it much here, but yeah, it was a fine sort of like case. Oh, Magnus Institute paperwork. I forgot about that. That is probably why it's not lower for me, because we do get a lot of information regarding what the Magnus Institute was wanting to do, specifically because it's listing out the like how this person or the dice itself are important and what they can do. Viability as subject, agent, and catalyst. Recommend referral to catalysts for enrichment, applicability, assessment, etc. They're trying to do something, and that's just those few lines of paperwork details so much that is so interesting, and we only get one other one to like compare, and both of those just a lot of speculation can happen from just a few lines, and I do enjoy when that happens. Otherwise, this episode's pretty fine. Nothing big amazing happens with it, so I'm not like raving about it. Episode 10, Saturday night. Guest on Madam E's channel. Bonzo is a guest on Madam Electrum's channel. I think that would get a rave review. Literally prove me wrong. Okay, episode 8, Running on Empty, and episode 10 are the only ones that start from the case in of itself. Because we start with a recording of an interview between Geraldine Hardy, who is an interviewing Nigel Dickerson, that was mentioned prior when Gwen used the audio of Klaus to blackmail Lena, and Lena was like, okay, I'll hire you as a externals liaison, give this letter to Nigel Dickerson. And this is Nigel Dickerson, and he's talking about Bonzo. He was a host for a child TV show, and Bonzo was this mascot that they created that got really popular, and then someone used a Bonzo costume to start murdering people, and that tarnished her reputation, and it ends sort of ambiguously, sort of like Nigel telling her, do not contact us ever again, and she's like, us? And he's like, why did you choose me? And then it cuts off there. I think it's also implied that Celia's the one who's listening to this one specifically. And yeah, that case is short too, because we get a lot after the fact, and that's in my eyes, honestly, if it was just a case in of itself of Nigel Dickerson and Geraldine Hardy, it would be probably middle of the road, because it still implies some pretty fun stuff in the case in of itself. After the fact, events after the fact. So, for example, we have Gwen going to Nigel Dickerson himself, voiced by Steve Newman. Also wanted to mention Catherine Luff voicing Geraldine Hardy. going to Nigel Dickerson and giving a letter to him. He's like, don't give it to me. And then down the stairs comes a demonic bonzo who eats up the letter and then leaves. And we're like, huh? And Gwen's like, huh? He can read? Bonzo is employed by the OIAR as a liaison. Bonzo has a 401k. Bonzo owns this apartment, and Nigel Dickerson is just there. That's fun. And then after the fact, well, so the Gwen events happen concurrently with the events with Sam and Alice, who are going into the Magnus Institute ruins. But yeah, Sam and Alice's events happen concurrently with Gwen's, and it jumps around. The good part is that you don't get lost as to what's happening. Because sometimes in these types of stories, if we go to different perspectives in pretty quick, rapid succession, you get kind of lost as to what's happening. But here is pretty smooth transitions from each. At the very end, the last one, we hear a tape recorder turn on, which is the first time in Magnus Protocol where we do, and that definitely set off a lot of alarms in a lot of us. And Sam and Alice find a room labeled Archivist, and they accidentally release Error, who we kept calling Error for the longest time up until episode 25. And I think that was an amazing name to call this monster, Error. Voiced by Beth Erie, who eventually becomes an archivist, the archivist. And this is, introduction of Error. And that's really a lot of points for that one. Otherwise, it's not an amazing episode for me because there's just so much happening and it gets kind of muddled with it. But yeah, I mean, introduction of Bonzo, introduction of Error, Gwen not having any survival instincts at all. Episode 11, Marked, is going in Still a Realtor. I think that this episode is in the middle of the park because there are some good aspects, some bad aspects. This is return of Ink 5 Old. It's not named that they're returning, but it's email messages between Gordy and Alison Leshy, and we only get one side of the conversation, which I feel is missing out on the conflict, because we only get messages from Gordy. We never get any messages from Allison. I think it's supposed to imply that all these messages are quote unquote archived or taken from Allison's inbox, and so we don't really get her responses because they would be in Gordy's. But I think that we're still missing half the conversation. There's some stuff missing for me in this case. But yeah, he's talking. It's Gordy who works for this landscaping company who is working with Alison Leshy and the government in that area to dig up old graves that have been there for hundreds of years and repair the ground before the eroding ground dumps dead bodies into the ocean. And this is the first mention of Oscar Jarrett as well. Like I said, Ink 5 is there. They don't Gordy doesn't name Ink 5 because he doesn't know who they are, but he does mention a person with a snake tattoo, which is a very definite, distinct feature of Ink 5 so they're there, and they're looking for Oscar Jarrett's, and they and the landscaping company. It's not landscaping, is it? It's Groundworks. Yeah, that Groundworks company digs up a body, and it's a very decaying old man, but he has a tattoo on his back that is in pristine condition, and that's in Oscar Jarrett. And we get more about Oscar Jarrett later, so I'm not going to talk about much of him here. And obviously, the tattoos are some aspect of a entity fear. I think this one specifically of the Vast. And Gordy begins to be consumed mentally by this tattoo. I don't know if it's implied that he kills the examiner who finds the body, but the examiner dies. And there is a really fun moment where he is talking to Alison Leshy, and then he switches to a more formal speech, and he's like, I am so sorry that I am being accused of like being too casual or whatever. I'm aware that my emails were coming across as in any way unprofessional, which is why I feel like we're missing the other conversation, because I'd love to see Allison unless she'd be like, "Hey, stop being so familiar with me." But it doesn't matter. In the end, it's unclear exactly what happens. There's still enough for there to be an implication that Gordy sort of lost it. I think he jumped off a cliff. There's not enough there to imply things, but there's still something there to show that it's within this realm of possibility. I want a little bit more, is what I'm saying. And yeah, overall, I just want the other side of the conversation with Alison Leshy, because that might flesh out a bit more of what's happening, especially regarding the coroner, especially regarding the break-in of the coroner's office. I think that's implied that it's Ink 5 Old that broke in and stole the body, and Gordy went to try to retrieve the body, and that's when he jumped off a cliff, maybe? Not sure. There's not enough there. But overall, it's a fine episode, middle of the road for me. Episode 12, Getting Off, is middle of the road, still a realtor B tier. The Bonzo sex joke. This is just a Bonzo sex joke. I think it was on Tumblr that someone asked Johnny Sims or Alexander Janual, one of those two, who named this episode, and one of them said, whoever, it doesn't really matter who said it, but like they said that it was basically Game of Chicken. One of them named it, and the other one was like, yeah, let's do it. And they played chicken with each other to see who would change it last minute, and either they both won or they both lost. I don't know how chicken does, but they just named it Getting Off. I guess this will be when I mentioned the episode naming convention for Magnus Protocol has the same sort of idea as like Magnus Archives, where a majority of the names are double entendres or mean two different things at the same time. Here, they really make a lot of it prevalent. Almost every episode has the title be connected to something you could say in a workplace, but also part of the case in of itself. So, I mean, like, for example, putting down roots is a euphemism, quote unquote, for establishing yourself in a location, making an adjustment, changing stuff, taking notes, writing down stuff. Those, have meaning within a workplace, but also have meaning within the story in of itself. Getting off, getting off of work, going somewhere to decompress from work. Say, for example, a strip club. Yeah, getting off. Sex. Bonzo. This is an insurance claim of a woman who works at the strip club that Bonzo appeared in, who lost her arm because of this Bonzo attack, and she's doing this insurance claim. She says that the bar club that she works at didn't do enough to protect her, and she's talking about how this bachelor party appears, and Bonzo appears, and the bachelor party thinks that someone hired Bonzo, and they're like having fun with him, and all of a sudden he starts Bonzo has pronouns, begins murdering people. This is where the woman loses her arm, and the descriptions written for Bonzo, this episode was written by Action Daniel. The descriptions written for Bonzo are disgusting. It's described that the seam in the middle of his face, where like the felt would be connected, rips open, and there's a mouth in between, which is the picture that I have. And like the like fleshy inside of him, it was just disgusting and terrifying. And yeah, I mean, it's in the middle of the road because it's not exciting to me for just straight up like murder mascot. This mascot horror is very prevalent in our culture right now. There's also the question as to why this person was killed, which tends to go more into like a plot theory craft mystery element that doesn't really like comment on the episode itself, but it is sort of random to have just a guy at a bachelor party in a strip club being torn apart by Bonzo. That sort of like makes this episode slightly less interesting. So if it was someone who was like definitely like, yeah, you either deserve to die or we know why you were chosen to die, then it'd be slightly better for me. But otherwise, it's just kind of like there. It shows the consequences of episode 10. So that's at least good. And like I said, Gwen's starting to fall apart, and that's always fun to see. So yeah, middle of the road. Episode 13, Futures, is going in Hunted by Lady Mowbray. I think that it's a fine episode in of itself. The voice I do enjoy a lot. It's a recording of a voicemail by a Darian, voiced by Ewan Sheedon, who is delivering a report, I guess, to Zora Trader, the app, voiced by Xena Carswell, who did a really good job delivering this line. It feels like Zora Trader is going to come back. But yeah, it's the guy, he's talking about how he eventually finds out that if he bets on himself and he hurts himself, he gets money. And so he begins to like have this addiction to hurting himself and getting money. And eventually he just jumps off a cliff expecting to get a big payout, but then all of a sudden he is in a hospital and he gets a notification from Zora Trader saying like, hey, you owe us money now. And I mean, like I said, the voice here was really interesting. It's annoying. The not the voice acting, the voice writing, the technical aspect of the voice himself of Darian is annoying, which is a good thing, especially if they're trying to make him unlikable. Because especially when he starts talking about like cryptocurrency and like stock trading and stuff, it's like, I don't know what you're saying, and I hate you. It's they write his voice really well. But yeah, he loses all money and he's in the hospital room and he's like, I want my money back to Zora Trader. And there is a moment that I did like. He's like, give me my goddamn money. Yes, my name's Daryl Laurel, account number, etc. That was kind of funny. Otherwise, him hurting himself was not enough schadenfreude for me. It felt like he was gloating that he was doing this. And it just wasn't that inspiring for me. I think it was not very inspiring from many people. And at the very end, we hear this thing crawling out of his phone and he screams and it's implied that it kills him, but we don't know what that thing was or why. And it's kind of just not exciting for me, unfortunately, on a personal level. You know, why kill him if he was killing himself or hurting himself? Why do all that if you're just gonna like crawl out of his phone and just hurt him? The Lord Trader itself is an interesting manifestation of something bad, but overall, there's not much in this case that inspires me to have fun with it because guy's annoying, the things he do is annoying, and the things he talks about is annoying. At least it's entertaining to hear him be annoying. So yeah, it's C tier for me. Episode 14, Pet Project, is going in Still a Realtor. The case written by Sean Pollington. It was fine. It's this woman, Alyssa Beck, who is writing up a report for her company about going to Reptile Emporium, something along those lines. And all of a sudden, there's a man, the guy who works there, manager, starts having snakes come out of his body, and I guess he dies, and the snakes attack Alyssa, and she dies as well, I guess. Resounding Reptile Emporium is what it's called. I just found it. It is a fine case. The transition from her reporting to her being like normal about it, or not normal, but like her actually typing as a person and not like trying to write a report, is jarring in a very fun way.
Will seal ingress hole after removal. Captured squirrel appears lethargic, likely injured or poisoned. Remove. Police aren't here yet. They say any minute, but I don't think it'll matter.
And it was terrifying to listen to it. I just, it was kind of for me. So she's like stuck in like a break room or something, and the snakes are attacking or trying to get to her, and she's like really scared. She's talking to her father. There's some implied backstory between her and her father, which makes me want to know more about them. I don't think we will. I don't know yet. I would love to hear more about her father. But as of now, there's not really much. So it just feels like you're teasing me. And then you're also teasing me because Alice Beck says that there is on the wall where there's like a cork board, there's some penned up letters of rejection from some institute. And it's implied that the manager guy was applying for something in the Magnus Institute and he was rejected by them, which is kind of funny, I will admit, but it's still like teasing. And overall, I feel like the case doesn't do anything interesting within the story in of itself. The case in isolation is fine, but overall, it doesn't really do anything beyond just like kind of pushing Sam to like investigate more. He's like, it could be any other institute, wouldn't it, right? And I'm like, yeah, sure, Sam, you can think that. Episode 15, Well Run, is going in Inc. 5 News. There is a lot here that is so fun. First, obviously, we have a case of a voicemail recording of like a caterer talking about he's calling, it's a tip-off hotline for like criminal stuff. He's talking about how he was hired, he and his 5 or 6 other people that he works with were hired to cater for this like really super uber rich event. What he usually does is if rich people pretend to hunt, and then he tricks them into thinking that they're eating the things they're hunted, but in reality they're not. Whatever. They get there, and the rich people are acting weird, and eventually turns out that the rich people are going to hunt them. This is an introduction of Lady Mowbray, and it is really fun. I remember the music in the back. There was like not sirens, but it was. I'll show an example of what it sounded like.
Are you prepared? She asked quietly. As we can be, I replied, but then she raised her hand to silence me, and it was as though she had sucked a gag in my mouth. I couldn't even think of disobeying her. The words just died in my throat. She returned to the group, her dogs flanking the whole way, and her silhouette outlined in the blood-red dusklight.
But it was really fun background music in these tense moments that are happening. The voicemail for the tip-off was Jesse Hawk. The caterer was Danny Scare, and Lady Mowbray is voiced by Ellie Dickens. And love Lady Mowbray, sexy, hot old lady woman who is an avatar of the hunt. Being hot and sexy and killing people is just amazing. And then right after that, Celia is the one who like listens to this episode or listens to this case. She felt disturbed by it, and then all of a sudden, Lady Mowbray is there, and the conversation that she has with Lady Mowbray is fascinating because these are both 2 people who we do not know anything about, and every single word that they have is dripped with subtext and subtlety, and I love it. Like I've talked about it before, how Celia talking to Lady Mowbray acts different than how she usually acts. She acts dangerous. She acts like she knows what she's doing, and I love that. And then all of a sudden, Gwen is there, and she's like, "Hey, Lady Mowbray, would you come over here?" And Lady Mowbray, like, she has 2 dogs with her that sound like hellhounds, and once Gwen appears, they sound like normal dogs. And it turns out Gwen invited her into the OIR because she was an external, which was a bad idea. And Celia is just rattled by this moment. That conversation between them 2, I adore. And if it was just that, if it was just Lady Mowbray, well-run case, and then Celia and Lady Mowbray, it would still be an amazing episode because of the interactions. But then we have Alice in a concert to see her brother Luke. We finally get an introduction of her brother. We've heard him before on the phone. We've heard her talking to him on the phone. We haven't heard him. He's voiced by Yannick Gonti, and their conversation, nothing to write home about. They're just talking. They're siblings. They have a really good relationship. But then after the fact, Alice is leaving, and she hears. Well, first it's a tape recorder clicking on, and then it's a woman who's intoning about her death, and it was the first time in the Magnus protocol where we hear this sort of writing that we've heard of multiple times in specifically season 5 of the Magnus Archives, of a person talking about the thing that they fear the most and then dying from it. Her talking about I read out the what she says in a prior video, so I'm not going to do that right now. But it's really interesting the way that she is intoning, and Alice is very afraid, and it's implied, obviously, that error caused this to happen, and the death of this woman, the drowning woman, was really like scary, and to hear Alice be affected by that, to run away from that, is so terrifying. It's horrifying for her to be experiencing this and not understand what's happening. And we know, we don't know 100% as to why, but we know that this is something interesting. Also, Laura Sawala is amazing as the drowning victim, and her intoning. I thought we were going to get more about that specifically, but now we know that it's Error / Archivist who's doing this, which is why there's a tape recorder and stuff like that. But yes, 3 big great moments in this episode. The case, Lady Mabry and Celia, and now Alice and the drowning victim. Amazing. This is an amazing episode because there's so much happening, and each has their moment of time to just be, and I love that so much. Episode 16, Antisocial, is going in Still a Realtor. This is where we have Madame Electrum. She is not going to be a guest on her channel. She's just still going to be a realtor. This is when we have Alice at the OIR reeling from the experience that she had. She had called 911, and Sam and Celia are comforting her, and she says that the paramedics say that the woman has been dead for ages, and the amount of water that she had in her lungs means that she could not have been speaking. So they think that Alice had shock, and she does not know what to believe. Then we get a recording of, it's just the audio of like a video, which I was like, okay, I guess, of Madam E, who is voiced by Kai Griffin, talking with Ink Fievel, who's voiced by Vera Chuck. And overall, the statement of the case in of itself is fine. The purposeful, annoying Gen Z voice of Madam E is really good. A lot of people on Tumblr were like, are they making fun of it or whatever? And it's like, it's satire. It's obviously that this is not how people actually talk, and she's a try hard, and etc. etc. We get the voice reveal for Ink Fievel, which is interesting enough. The things that are happening in the case of itself, of like Madame E talking about her situationship with Ink Fievel, and the tattoo that she got of a heart, and Ink Fievel telling her to dig up a body and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the controversy that Madame E finds herself in, and then her being hospitalized, and then it's implied, I guess, that the heart tattoo of Ink Fievel begins to kill her, and eventually just falls off and kills Madame E. I feel like the case in itself was fine. The things in it happened was fine, but the fact that there is no reaction from the characters beyond like, oh, we just heard that, it is missing out for me, because like I've talked about before, Madam E has 137,000 followers on YouTube, or VidLink. I don't know what VidLink is. 137,000 people follow her. How has this not been like something that they know about, something recent that they talk about, like, oh my god, I heard that Madam E passed away. I can't believe we got this video that was unreleased that sort of like explains why she died, etc. I just feel like this case is taken in isolation, and it should not be. I think this case should be like something that people talk about before, and it just feels like it doesn't do anything within the world. It feels separate from the world, which by itself, that idea would make this episode worse for me. But the case in of itself and the things surrounding it are good enough that it's middle of the road for me. But I just wish that they put this case in the world and made it affect the world in of itself. We also get Lena yelling at Gwen about bringing in Lady Mabry into the OIAR, who is quote unquote dangerous. And Gwen is like, she's an old lady, so why why is she dangerous? Episode 17, saved copy, is going in still a realtor. This one is middle of the road. I tend to not like horror stories that could be based in quote unquote real life. I like things that are supernatural, that are unexplained, that are alien. The things that are like human being horrible, I don't really like. And so this is a guy, his name is Darian, who's talking about, well, this is actually a statement given to the Magnus Institute. This is the other statement that, the other case that is a statement that details what the Magnus Institute was doing. Viability as subject, agent, catalyst, recommended continuation incarceration as part of Welling Materia research program, etc. That's always fun. This one was the better one of the two, in my opinion, at least. But yeah, Darian's talking about how he went to a therapist session for his anger and appears at the Oxford Outreach Center and gets picked up by the hospital. He's all in pain and dehydrated, and he finally gets released. And he finds they take him to his home and finds himself, who looks better. He's like having a good life and stuff, and he lives with him for a bit. Old Darian and new Darian are living together. Old Darian asks new Darian, hey, like, how do you deal with your anger? And new Darian's like, let me show you. Hey, remember that father that like died in your world of cancer? Well, he survived here, and he's in my basement, and I'm torturing him. And I don't really like that kind of horror, honestly. It was good. It was written well. The implications are really there, and the horror is delivered pretty well. But overall, I just don't care for it. Hilltop, Oxford Outreach Center. Celia listens to this case, and no one else knows that she listened to it. It's like she like compares it to her sort of also being in this world from the Hilltop gap in the world. So it's just in the middle of the road for me. I think it was leading up to something interesting, but then to reveal that it's something mundane, quote unquote human, that is like the horror of it, I don't really like. But yeah, it's fine. Episode 18, solo work, is going in a guest for Madam East channel. I remember specifically ranking this and actually putting in like middle of the road. But the more I thought about it, the more I enjoyed this episode. It is another Augustus episode. It is a coroner's report by Dr. Rashid about Violet Parker, who is this body that was found late at night, and it was recently found, and the woman, as she's being autopsied, starts talking, and it's an intonation of her finding herself in this lonely house, and it's the lonely, and it's another victim of the error, and her like intonation of it is really fun and interesting to hear. Augustus is Tom Fearon is an amazing voice actor, and really delivers the horror of being lonely in a very fun way. We also get Alice and Teddy talking. I think this is when he mentions that they work in Royal Mint Court, which was built by Robert Smirk, or at least designed by him. I think this episode is underrated by me, which is why I put it in A tier, because it is actually pretty good. The writing's pretty good. The voice acting is really good. We also see Sam and Alice begin arguing and begin fracturing in this moment, which builds up to later episodes, and I do enjoy that immensely. So yes, A tier for this episode. I feel like I underrate. Hi, Editing David here. So when I was recording, my battery started running out and I started to rush a little bit, and that means that some episodes that I wish I wanted to talk more about didn't get to talk as much about. And so I'm here to just add in some more details about some of the episodes. I'll be popping in and out from now on just to give a little bit more for some episodes. I wanted to highlight a bit more on episode 18 because I really do think that I underestimated at first, and now I'm fully appreciating it for what it is. With Augustus reading out Dr. Rashid's examiner's investigation of Violet Parker, like I said, it's really short how he's talking about. Like he talks about his dissection of Violet Parker, and it's a really short section and details how she was found and the body started talking. Very short and quick, but there's a lot of emotion behind it, especially of his fear of like, I don't know what the hell happened here. And then transcript is much longer. Like I want to say 3 times as long. In text writing, in text of just the transcript, as I have it on right now, it doesn't look that long, but it feels long. And that's what I enjoy about it, because it's this sort of slow, slight aching dread throughout the entirety of the statement. I wanted to highlight a delivery for a line in this episode by Augustus, which is,
"Now all I can do is walk and hope and ignore the burning in my throat and the aching in my belly. Keep screaming, hoping someone might hear me through all that cloying fog."
I wanted to highlight that for 2 reasons. One, it's a great example of the lonely and the fear of the lonely. You know, the cloying fog, the screaming, the hoping that someone might be there. I really enjoy that sort of like writing there. And then also the voice acting of Augustus by obviously Tim Fearing is really like, you can feel the dread and sadness within Violet Parker being read out by Augustus like this. And there are many different times in different statements where Augustus and also Chester and Norris have moments that are very human, like a laugh here or there, or like their voice sort of like slowing down or catching up or whatever. It feels like a human is reading it, like John reading a statement in Magnus Archives. And so I really like that a lot, especially here, and just the entire case of solo work of this woman's intonation just has a lot of simple dread, and I enjoy that a lot. Episode 19, Hard Reset, is going in Hunted by Lady Mowbray. Like I said before, I don't really enjoy like older episodes in Archives, but do enjoy them in Protocol. This is an exception. I think the episode being about Isaac Newton is inspired and really interesting that the events here can be correlated to the events in real life in terms of his lab being burnt down and like he having a dog. But overall, I think the things in this episode serve more as a launching off point for like alchemy and stuff. But overall, it's not that much interesting to me. The alchemy here is kind of hard to follow. What he's doing to the dog is odd and not that scary to me. I mean, the horror could be delivered by the dog being transformed, but because of how ambiguous the alchemy is, the horror is not hitting as hard. I do enjoy the moment where who is it? Boyle? Hook is writing this to Boyle. Robert Hook is writing this to Robert Boyle. He looks at the dog and the dog looks at him, and it doesn't see him like a dog would see his master, but like a person would know one another. And that is fun. Otherwise, I don't know what's happening to the dog, so I don't know if I should be afraid or not. It's cool that it's all real, or it could be correlated to something that actually happened in real life. Otherwise, it's just not my favorite. Episode 20, Social Stigma, is going in a guest on Madame E's channel. Ink 50 is a guest in Madame E's channel. This is when we have Gwen going to Ink 50 to give them a externals contract so they can work for the AYR. And this is the first live statement that we get in Magnus Protocol of someone just telling about their story. And I think it's really interesting that Ink 5's story is akin to an avatar where they begin to court a fear and want to see the fear in somebody, and they grow power from that. It's really interesting that Ink 5's power does not come from one specific power. It seems to be a catch-all because we've experienced Ink 5's tattoos in terms of like changing a body. Oscar Jarrett's with like the ocean, the heart on Madame E. Later in the episode, when they kill somebody with barbed wire, so, and then in the statement of itself of someone getting burnt alive, because all the powers, a few powers, Smirks 14, are one singular power. They are feeding the one power, so they're all those 14 are feeding in, giving power to Ink 5, and I think that's a really interesting concept that doesn't break anything of the lore. It's just an escalation, but even then, it's not even that powerful. They don't know how to control this power, but they know they can do it, and they do it to make people afraid, and that's the important part for the fears. I enjoy that a lot. VR Chalk as Ink 5 is a great voice actor, and they deliver their confusion and fear, but also desire in a very interesting way. Sam and Alice begin fracturing further. Starkwall is confirmed to have burnt down the Magnus Institute in 1999, so that's also a big revelation in this episode as well. But yeah, love Ink 5, love them. My camera's running out of battery, so we're gonna try to go through these. Episode 21, Breaking Ground, is going in Ink 5 Muse S tier. This one's so good because I forget who voices it actually. Chester reads it's a letter of a man. What's his name? He works for the Magnus Institute, and he's like, "Hey, I know we want to do this really crazy world-changing ritual, and we want to do it in the Millennium Experience, which is being built for the turn of the century in England. But I don't think we should do it here because there's some weird stuff happening here. And this is, to me, this is very extinction. This is the extinction represented because it is about pollution. It is about being replaced by something. It is being about the trash and leftover of humanity. And because a lot of people saw the change of the millennium and the Millennium Experience itself that was being built as a representation for disaster, for great change. And that feels very extinction to me. The guy who's writing this letter is like, listen, his name's Leonard Kenning. Listen, I know Dr. Wellings wants this to happen at this time, which I disagree with, but we're not going to fight at that anymore. But I'm letting y'all know, don't do it in this location. And he tells them about going to that location, which is, the building, the place where they're building the Millennium Experience, and seeing a worker be transfixed by this mixing of, I think it was like concrete, goes over to a ditch and gets attacked by an older version of himself and taking and like consumed into the ground and dies, allegedly. And he was like, yeah, so I saw this happen, so let's not go there. And I think that's really fun that like the Kennings didn't much care for the worker and was like, actually, we're gonna focus on not coming here. And I guess he was successful too because nothing happened with the Millennium Experience. And this was like a year or two, I believe, before the institute itself was burnt down, a year before. And so yeah, it's a lot of answers are being given, but also a lot of questions too are being presented, and I do enjoy that a lot for this episode. It feels like there's so much that we don't know, obviously, but this makes it very apparent, and it inspires so much speculation, which I love. Whenever I've talked about it a handful of times before, whereas like if this episode inspires me to think, I love it. And I love this episode because I also love the extinction of itself. So that even brings it up a bit more too. In regards to episode 21, Breaking Ground, I really like this episode a lot more than I actually kind of like detailed. There is so much in the letter that Mr. Kennings writes to Dr. Welling and the other people in the Institute in regards to what the Institute is doing and like their great work and stuff like that. We get a lot of that information here in regards to like alchemy. And I do like the moment where they're like, yeah, we're no longer following Christianity, but like, let's not follow astrology. I like that moment. And when he's at the construction site for the Millennium Experience and he's talking to a foreman, I like the dialogue here because, the Kennings asks the foreman how long it's gonna uh, stay up the dome, and he says, "Could be there forever," with an odd manic edge to his voice, or it could be gone in a year. You just never know, do you? You never know what's coming, and then like Kenning says, like the way he talked about it, it was kind of unsettling. And I like that moment because it's very much like an avatar of the extinction, or at least someone influenced by the extinction, being like, anything can happen. Oh my god. And I like that because it could be innocuous. Is that the word? It could be something that doesn't mean anything. It's just a guy talking about it, and he's just kind of weird about it. Or it could actually be influenced by a fear power. And I like that moment a lot here. The way that Kennings writes about the Pakistani man's death and like the effects he's seen from the Millennium Experience. At the beginning, when he was talking about the Millennium Experience, he was talking about how disastrous it could be, how dangerous it is, how bad the location is, and he was filled with a lot of like emotion about it. And then he sees this guy die, and he doesn't feel anything about it. He just leaves. He's like, "Yeah, well, that happened. Let's leave and report back." And this sort of like duality of like him really caring about their great work and also not caring about a human being really paints a bright picture of how the Magnus Institute ran its course and how you can see how different it was from the current or the Magnus Archives Magnus Institute. It also gives a sense that the Manchester Institute was more like there was more things happening within the Institute wholesale, while the London Institute was more disconnected inside in the departments and stuff, and it was just academic stuff, and they weren't doing anything. And it was only archives itself that things happened to. But the Institute in Manchester, it was all hands on deck onto the great work, and that's the feeling I got at least. A little later in the episode, we have the conclusion for what happened last episode with Inkfivel and Gwen, and like she's running away from them, and she bumps into a bystander, and he has like barbed wire tattoos on his forearm or something like that, and Inkfivel is like, "Hey, drop," and cuts his arm off with the tattoos on his that are made of barbed wire, which was really fun. And like they corner Gwen and they're going to kill her when all of a sudden you hear, well, first Gwen drops her phone and the phone lands in some like water and it dies. So the recording cuts off there and it picks up with a click of a tape recorder, and we hear Inkfivel approach Gwen and like threaten her, and then Gwen just starts talking. "When I was a little girl, there was a shed at the bottom of the garden that I was always told never to go inside. There were tools and sharp and deadly things." And Inkfivel is freaked out by this, and they don't know what's happening. And that's when the archivist slash heir appears, and they fight between each other over who should kill Gwen, and Gwen uses this moment to escape. And I really like the immediate intonation of Gwen being compelled by the archivist. And like I haven't touched on it before, but they really like hammered in how the language or the syntax of the intonation is. I mean, with the drowned woman in episode 15, with solo work, oh my god, solo work, I didn't even mention that for solo work, the way that it flows, this intonation of Gwen, the way it flows, the flow of the running guy in 26 catching up, they have such a ebb and flow to their language. The way that they're speaking, it feels relentless. It hits, it's smooth, and I love that. I wish we got to know what exactly Gwen was talking about in that location. What she's saying is that one time she opened up the shed and there was like a dead fox and there were just a bunch of maggots there. And so she's talking about the moment that she was really afraid about, but I wonder if there's anything more to that. I just want more backstory for Gwen. That's all I want, honestly. Episode 22, Mixed Signals, also going in 5 Volt News. This one's also really interesting because this is Augustus speaking again. Tim Fearon, love Tim Fearon, is a letter of Hans Berger to Richard Catan asking him, like, hey, when you cut into the brains of these animals, did you see the things I saw? So these are things I saw. And he's talking about this guy, Herr Schmidt, who has a deformity in his brain, which means he can access his brain, and he's doing brain tests with the guy. And he connects them, he gets a dream of being underwater and there being a heart underwater and like radio waves atop. He's like, it sucks that you can't connect them both. And I think this is a metaphor for humanity in the heart, in the water, and the radio waves being the horror entities, the fear entities. Yes. And when Berger connects the brain to a telegraph and sends the telegraph to the brain, and the brain responds with the telegraph signal, and then he reads them out, and it's a very I am here alone, help out, get out. Ugh, love this. It's so visceral the way that it's read out, and I think it's contacting this eldritch entity, which means so much for this story, but doesn't change anything. And I love that about that. If this is what is actually happening. Some people are speculating that Hans Berger somehow contacted John, Martin, and Jonah, in their brain, which I don't see that, especially because this is so long ago, and it just doesn't feel that way to me. This feels like he's contacting the horror entities, and that's really, really interesting to me. Oh my god, this is also the episode where Celia, Sam and Alice finally like have this big confrontation, and Sam is being a little whiny baby, and Alice is being terrified. And Sam doubles down on him wanting to find out more about the Magnus Institute. And Celia's like, are you sure? And Sam says, yes. And Celia says, awesome. So I found these names. And she says the names. And they're just random people. I don't know who they are. She says Jonathan Sims and Martin Blackwood, which obviously big important names for the story. So this is when that happens. Episode 23, A New You, unfortunately, is going to go in Via Con Bonzos. This is written by Harlan Guthrie, who writes for Malevolent Podcast. I really want to listen to this podcast because I know that I've heard a lot of good things. This case, I'm not a fan of. I don't blame him. It's Alessis Newman who's writing in a forum about being a better person and finding your thing or whatever. And she's like, I found my thing. And I see it, and doesn't describe what the thing is, which I think is supposed to convey some sort of horror, some sort of interesting thing, but I feel like there needs to be some indication as to what this thing is first, which it turns out is just a piece of coral, and then she's talking about putting it inside her body, and the coral is proliferating inside her, and then things are happening, and then like the coral births someone else, a new you. And there's just not enough for me to know what the hell is happening. Every other post, it says that it has like X amount of likes and X amount of comments. And I think, why mention that if we don't see the comments? And then she's like talking about like, oh, she's there and she looks beautiful. She has my eyes. She keeps dreaming about her. And I mean, I talked about my gripes with this episode before. There's little through line as to why this is happening. We have to start jumping through hoops to try to figure out why she's doing this to herself. It's somewhat of a confusing premise. Like, what do you mean you have to find a thing to make you feel better? Can we like find out why you want to do better? What other objects have been used to find yourself? And at the very end, she's like, something's wrong with her. And then we don't get a resolution from that. And I saw Harlan Guthrie post on a Reddit post talking about how they changed the ending, how Rusty Quill, Algernon Newell, Jonathan Sims changed the ending to it to what is in this episode, but he posted the original ending, and in my opinion, it's much better and would not have made me dislike this episode as much. This ending, his original ending, is a lot more positive, a lot more happy, and it's more about how the new her, I think, embraces her or something like that. I have to reread it again. I'll link it in the description, the Reddit post where he posted that. But yes, I just don't like this episode that much. The implications of the case are they don't do anything in the story also, and the things around it are fine. I mean, we have, who is it, Gwen and Alice finally talking about things that are happening, um and that's fun, I guess. But either ways, I just don't really like this episode that much. I'm very sorry. I will check out Malevolent and base my opinions off of Malevolent in terms of Holland Guthrie. I don't blame him for this case. I just don't like the case, and I don't like this episode. Episode 24, Raising Issues, is going and still a realtor. It's middle of the road. I don't really care about baby horror. You know, Rosemary's Baby was a good movie, but the baby wasn't there until like at the end of it. But any sort of horror surrounding a baby being evil is kind of to me. Uh, there's some interesting sound design behind it. So obviously we have a woman who is recording through a baby monitor. I guess the baby monitor can record, and it's Faya Durham voicing the mom. I think she had a name, didn't she? She's like, yeah, my baby's been kind of weird. I also went to a meet with like other single mothers, and the woman Celia there is really nice. That name drop doesn't go anywhere. Uh, and then the baby, what was it? Rupert keeps eating her, and that's. I mean, the sound design, the horror writing of it was really interesting. Overall, I just don't really care for it. There's nothing bad about it. Really well written. I just don't really care for evil babies. They're not that interesting to me. Um, this episode is elevated a little bit more because Frank Voss is back as Basira Hussein. This is where we get, that she's not a cop. She works at a school, and that's just elevates the episode a little bit more for me. Overall, just middle of the road. Episode 25, Gut Feelings, is still a realtor for me. I think it's written very well. It's just too disgusting. It's really disgusting. It's hard to re-listen. The first time was fine. The second time was a little harder. Reading it, really hard. It's disgusting, and what it wants to do, it does well. And it's about a guy who does reviews for like bad places, and he's like, I went to this place and it was terrible. What's his name? Kieran goes to Hungry Man Grill, and the man who works there is disgusting and feeds him bad stuff, and he's forced to eat it because he's super hungry, but the things he eats are disgusting. I'm not going to describe them here. And then after the fact, he's like, I can still feel the insects inside me, so I'm going to go lie down and not do anything. And I think it's implied he dies. There's no answer to that, but he quits, definitely. It's just difficult to read because it's so disgusting, which is a really good aspect of the writing. But because of that, it's just middle of the road for me. Colin appears and begins to trash the place, which is also really fun. And yeah, otherwise, it's just sort of fine for me. Episode 26, Catching Up, is going in still a realtor B tier. This is written by Muna Hewson, who writes for this podcast that I'm blanking on right now, but it's also pretty famous. I don't tend to like things about sports, which also, like, the case itself is written well, but because the content of it brings it down for me. Same with the last episode. And yeah, it's just not that fun, but not bad. We get the archivist name drop. It's a police report from a guy who witnesses his former coach die, killed by the archivist, which before we only knew about Error, and now we name drop as archivist here. And that's also like really good, at least. Alexander Rumins talks about his coach, Gerard, what, Smith, was it? Something like that. Yeah, Gerard Smith. I was right. And he gets killed by Archivist. And yeah, Alice hears this and tells Sam, like, hey, we released this from the Archivist room that we discovered. And Sam's like, oh, okay, that's great. Helen Richardson's here. That's a big part of this episode. Imogen Harris returns to Helen Richardson. This is where Still Realtor comes from. Hello. And her conversation is really fun because we do get some answers regarding, some clues, I guess, regarding Magnus Institute, and she gives them papers and stuff, and that's always really fun. Episode 27, Driven, is going in Ink 5 Ol Muse. I enjoy this episode so much. Augustus, Tim Fearon, reads this out, and it's theorized that Augustus is Jonah Magnus, and it's Jonah Magnus's letter being read out here, allegedly, implied. And it's about him talking about his work, and he is dealing with a recent disappointment, and he didn't really much like it, and he's like walking down the streets of London, and he sees this truck, this taxi, pull up, take this man in, and kill the man, basically. And it's pretending to be a carriage, but in reality is not a carriage. And he tries to understand it more, and he gets Archibald Cameron, who works for the Institute, to go in and take notes of stuff. And he's writing stuff down, and he's terrified and angry and dying. And just the fact that this is another instance of an assistant of the Magnus Institute being sacrificed to learn stuff is just sucks, but really fun. It's horrifying. I've talked about this before. It's horrifying that these assistants are being sacrificed like this, but it makes me feel stuff. There is so much in this episode. Like, I remember recording this and I was like, there is so much to talk about from this episode. You know, Helen's Magnus papers are a lot of details that are great to dissect. And then we also, because I forget what episode prior to this, we know that there is going to be a ministerial visit. And this is when it's name dropped that it's Trevor Bloody Herbert. So that's always a surprise. And yeah, it's just so much happened in this episode. So much information is delivered here that I just love. In regards to 27, I am a lot more passionate about this episode than I let on. I was just really focused on trying to talk about 27 because the battery is running out. But I do actually really enjoy episode 27 because, in the same sort of sense as Kennings in 21 Breaking Ground, Jonah Magnus has a very sort of detached sense to the world. Every time he saw someone die in this case letter, he never expressed any sort of remorse or worry about the person beyond worry of his own self. And that is infuriating, but also fun, makes sense, etc. There is a lot in this episode in general, and then a lot inside the case itself as well. You know, the letters that Jenna writes. He talks about different people and different things that we don't get full context about. So just starts painting in little spots in the whole big picture, but we don't know what the picture is. And then we get to him talking about Archibald Cameron and convincing him to go into the growler and take notes on a notebook to learn about it. And the way, I don't want to say this is like the goriest episode, it's not by far, but it's the way that that Jonah talks about the things that happened to Cameron. His analytical faculties begin to desert him shortly after the loss of his skin, and it is clear from the handwriting exactly when his eyes depart his skull. Also, come on, dude, can you please give a shred of emotion? He was excited. He was excited because he learned that the things are linked to fear. The monsters are linked to fear, and so that's also a good indication of what is happening in this world. Like, we're still with fear and disease. That's important. And then papers that Helen sent over to Celia and Sam with the information about the locations that the Magnus Institute was looking into. Also, really fun. A lot of small little details there that are just, again, painting small little spots in the big picture, but you don't see the big picture yet. And it's driving me insane, and it's still really good despite that. Also, they talk about them having sex that happened last episode, which I also forgot about because it was just not, it doesn't matter. Episode 28, Interruptions, is going into a guest on Manamee's channel. This is a really good episode because we got a handful of things happening here. Once the more that we go down the series, the more things happen in case and out. So here we have Ian Hales as Trevor Herbert, MP, who is doing a review on the OIAR, and we start with him talking to like Cash and stuff like that, and obviously Trevor Herbert being the vampire hunter who was homeless in Magnus Archives, who was an avatar of the Hunt. Obviously, he's no longer an avatar of the Hunt that we know of. He might draw power from other types of fear. I can see how an MP can draw fear, can make people afraid, but no, we're not talking about that. He's there, and he's being disruptive. You know, that's always fun. Sam goes out to try to see what car he's driving in because he and Alice had a bet, and all of a sudden he's attacked, quote unquote, by Jarkvist, who is pulling a statement from Sam, and it's Sam describing when he went to get tested by the Magnus Institute. And so, if I wasn't part of it, but if you were part of the ARG, you know that Sam and other kids were listed as being tested by Magnus Institute, and he was rejected because he had a very high empathy score. And I only know that because I watched a video about the ARG by Pinkology Art. I'll link that video as well. I'll go check that out. And it is, this is, him actually having that interview by two old women, a pair of women, and then being lost and finding Dr. F. Welling's office and interrupts his ritual, I guess, or some sort of thing that he's doing, which causes Dr. Welling's bone skeletons to rip out of his body and begin to tear his body apart, which traumatizes Sam because he's like a child. I don't know if he like subdued the memory, what's the term, and he doesn't remember that. Like the trauma was too much that he just blocked it out of his memory, and now it's being pulled up by the archivist, or he always knew what had happened and just never talked about it. I don't know which one's more fun. Both are pretty fun in of itself. Gwen pushes a little bit more into the OIR managerial position and gives Trevor, last episode, she got an email of full of information about Lena and her malfeasance, and she gives that dossier to Trevor Herbert, be like, hey, fire her, replace with me, please. And obviously she succeeds in the later episodes. But yeah, this is really cool when she's like doing shady stuff, and I love that about her. Shahan Hamza, voice actor for Samama Khalid, Sam. Amazing performance. He has been doing an amazing performance throughout the entirety of the season, and he really gets to show off his range here, giving this forced statement out from Sam. I'll also point out the other voice actors. Billy Hindle as Alice Dyer brings an amazing quality of duality, I guess. I don't want to be pretentious about it. They play Alice in a very fun way, where it's like you can tell the emotion behind Alice's statements, whatever she's saying. There's a lot of subtext in how it's delivered, and the delivery is just on point for Billy Hindle. Love what they're doing. Anuja Battersby as Gwen brings she brings like this vulnerability to Gwen that feels like a strength. Like Gwen is willing to push outside of her boundaries to do something, and it's uncomfortable for her, but it is really great to see her blossom out of this like person that she is. Um, and Anuja's a really great delivery for that as well. Sarah Lambie as Lena Kelly does a really great performance of this office manager who is at the end of her string and is ready to snap at any time, but also really cool and calm and collected outwardly, and does a really good performance there. Ryan Hope Veer Anderson as Colin. We don't get to see much of him, and I feel like he's underutilized for Colin because he really has this sort of manic energy to him, and the anger and the Scottish accent that he has really punches through, and I can barely understand him sometimes, but that's just because of me. And he does a really good job as well. And obviously, Tim Fearon, I cannot, Tim Fearon is my new Sue Sims for this season, for this show, because most of his episodes are just amazing. Obviously, Jonathan Sims and Alexander J. Newell do a really good job as well. Something I've neglected to mention that I mentioned a few videos ago, but when the cases begin, it sounds like text to speech, like robotic voices speaking. But as it keeps going, it turns into more of a natural voice. And as the cases end, it flows back into the like robotic voice. And the three of them do a really good job having that transition not feel jarring and feel natural. And I've talked about it before, how it feels like you're like zooming into the case, and and the case is part of you. Part of the story is just you're living in it, is what I'm trying to say. And they do a very good job bringing us into the world and then back out in a very seamless way. Also, shout out to Kazim Tossin Amor, who voices Teddy Vaughn. Don't get much of him, but what we do get is at least really good. Also, Lorianne Davis as Celia Ripley is so smooth in the subtlety in everything that she is saying, and it makes me tear my hair out with how much intention is behind Celia's words and nothing is shown. Like, how do you do that in such an amazing way that is so infuriating but isn't terrible? Like, it's so good the way that she is able to play Celia. I like how I'm using the wiki to find the names. I like how Bonzo is uncredited. That's great. Episode 29, Keyed In, is going in Still a Realtor. I think that the case itself is good, but the position of it in the season is not the best. So we have Viola Locke writing in her travel journal. She's an old lady who's traveling with her husband Stan to Prague, and they visit a place that they went to when they were younger, which is like a lover's bridge, where they put a lock on like the chain to show that they will love each other forever. And they end up going to a museum called that like Stan translates into Lock Museum, but it actually translates to the Locked Museum, and it was an intentional mistranslation on his part. And they go in and they find their lock and a bunch of other locks, and then they are locked inside, and the water starts filling, and they're threatening to be drowned. Stan drowns, Viola escapes, and yeah, that's that. It is specifically a homicide case report reporting about Stan's death, and like the key itself, the object, is in the hands of the investigator. And yeah, this is obviously buried or buried adjacent, and I love the buried. Like I said, the key itself is somewhere, so that's Chekhov's key. They're going to use that. I said in my video that like this police was in Cheshire area, and Gwen might be a Cheshire Bouchard. I don't know yet. The key is there for an important reason. It's gonna come back, and I think it's because Gwen is gonna take it because she listened to this episode. Beyond that, the other parts of the episode, Celia finds Sam passed out, and thankfully he's awake, and he's like, "Yeah, the archivist wants to go to the Hilltop Center that we found out from Helen's papers, and we have to go now." And Celia's like, "I don't think we should. That's a bad idea." And he's like, please. And she's like, okay. And he calls Alice to let her know and interrupts her having a drink with Teddy, and Teddy's about to tell her something, but he's not able to. The episode sort of ends in a cliffhanger in terms of like, oh no, what's gonna happen next? Especially because Alice goes to the ticket office and tries to get on the train, but they don't let her. And she tries calling Sam, and she's like, "Hey, the archivist is on the train with you," which, you know, a lot of people thought. I thought too that there was going to be a confrontation in the train, but obviously it didn't. But whatever. So yeah, like the case is good. Everything else around it is good. However, I think because the case itself of like the key feels out of place in this location, it feels like this case should have been earlier in the season. And I think probably like, I don't know, uh, driven or mixed signals case or breaking ground case could have been used there, but then again, those were important for the characters to hear. So a case that was important for Gwen to hear, but not enough for the others to hear. I don't know. It felt out of place, and it felt like, okay, we need to have a case here. Let's put in this one. I mean, this is the episode before the finale, so like I kind of expect it to be prevalent, but the case itself is not really that prevalent. So it is what it is, which is why it's going in middle of the road for me, still realtor. And finally, episode 30, Dead End Job, is going in a guest for Madam E's channel. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. This episode was not enough for me, but it was enough for the season and what it gave. We have, you know, Sam, Celia, and then Alice a little later going to Hilltop Center, which has been closed down since 1997, I believe, and meeting a custodian there. The custodian gets intoned by the archivist, and his statement is about how he started working at the Hilltop Center. The details given in his statement about the Hilltop Center are really fun. They don't tell much about what's happening, what is the Hilltop Center, but what is there is really fun and pretty horrifying in its description. And then he begins turning into concrete because he's becoming part of Hilltop. We get the archivist attacking Celia and pulling a statement from her, or part of a statement. We don't hear all of it. And I know that there was more to it, but she's talking about how she remembers her stranger domain, because obviously Celia is the same Celia we saw in Magnus Archives in season 5, who was in Hammond, who was voiced by Lorianne Davis, all the same people. We learn part of her backstory in terms of how she got here, which she doesn't remember, but she knows that there's nothing left for her in the archives world, which is an incorrect statement. She doesn't know that the fears were taken away from that world, and so she fears being taken back to it, and she knows that she has to balance the unbalance of her being here and send someone else on the other way, which I think is a flawed plan. But she also thinks she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to sacrifice somebody. And Sam's there, and she's like, I mean, I could sacrifice you. I got to do it for Jack. She has a child. Neglected to mention Jack. She has a Jack who's a child. The things in this episode are really good for what has happened so far in the season in regards to Celia and Hilltop Center, but I want more answers. I want more, which is why it isn't higher. And I think in and of itself, the story is good, the cases are good, everything it's a really good conclusion to this season, which is why it's going in A tier. If it was just more answers for me, it could have gotten a bit higher. Either way, it is good for what it is. And then Sam and the archivist also fall through the rift, which is leads into the epilogue, which is Sam falling into the London exclusion zone. But we'll probably get that answer whenever season 2 comes out, which is in February of next year, which is so long away. But yes, these are my final rankings. I had to rearrange some of the episodes because after editing it, I had better, stronger opinions in my own opinion. Originally, I had put episode 15 as my least favorite of the Infival Muse tier, which after I was editing, I was like, that feels so incorrect. So I pushed it up to the front because, yeah, I re-listened to it like day or two ago, and it does hold up really, really well. I also had put 18 solo work as my least favorite of the guest on Madam East channel, but it was mostly I had mostly put it there, I think, because I was like, yeah, it's good, but like just the writing in of itself is amazing. So I bumped it up, but I do think that my favorite of the guest on Madam East channel is 3, putting down roots, especially because of that phalanges line. Ugh. The rest of it, in terms of when I ordered it, it was very much like, which one do I prefer over the others? I think in terms of Haunted by Lady Mabry, Hard Reset has a better writing than the other two. Thankfully, and unfortunately, there's only one episode, and that episode is 23 in by Bonzos. But I'm fine with that. Like, overall, just looking at it, out of 30 episodes, only 4 I dislike. That's a pretty good track record considering other seasons of the Magnus archives. So yeah, that is the final rankings. Now that we're in hiatus between season 1 and 2, Rusty Quill will be putting out like other stuff in between. There's some semi-canon fluff, some what if that are not canon, other stuff surrounding the Magnus Protocol. I'm not going to cover them because they're not super integral to the story. Obviously, I'll listen to them, but it's not going to be important for me in like what I'm talking about in this channel. And once February comes around and Magnus Protocol Season 2 starts coming out, I will continue putting out videos of every 4 episodes detailing my thoughts, ideas, and theories regarding them, and see how the story evolves and changes, especially because after Sam and Archivist were sent through the rift, what's going to happen now? Also, something happened with Colin, too. I don't know yet. In this hiatus, I will be working on larger video projects separate from Magnus Archives and Magnus Protocol, talking about some books that I enjoy. I don't know how much I'm going to get through. I think I'm working on one right now. It's taking me a long time, but it's a lot, and I'm really proud of it. And I would appreciate it if y'all would take a look at those videos once they come out. And between these larger projects, I will be putting out videos also analyzing specific episodes of the Magnus Archive. So I'm looking forward for sharing that as well. And yeah, if you got this far, thank you so much for coming on this journey with me, sharing my opinions. Tell me in the comments, what episodes you agree with the ranking, which episodes you disagree with in the ranking, which episodes you think should have been scored higher or lower in your opinion. Because my opinion is my opinion. Yours may be different, and I'd love to hear what you guys say. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think. Avoid walking in the London streets and avoid going into weird carriages that you don't recognize. And I'll see you later.